No sector has done more to increase living standards in this country and frankly around the world than manufacturing. And yet, we have never experienced the degree of change that American manufacturing especially, is about to undergo. That in turn is going to have a tremendous impact on Americans everywhere.
Hello, everyone. This is Barbara Humpton, CEO of Siemens USA, and you're listening to the Optimistic Outlook podcast. My guest today is Stephen Gold. He is the president and CEO of the Manufacturers Alliance, an organization that's been supporting industry leaders since 1933. What I want to do in our discussion today was connect what's happening in manufacturing to some of the bigger trends happening in the world of technology. In particular, you're going to hear Stephen refer to the fourth industrial revolution that's unfolding across American industry. Over the previous decade, we saw digital technologies transforming our consumer lives. They came to sectors such as retail and entertainment. And now here comes that next wave. It's manufacturing. It's infrastructure. It's transportation. So don't forget to share your feedback with me on LinkedIn. While you're there, subscribe to the Optimistic Outlook newsletter or send an email to optimist.us@siemens.com. Now, let's get into the conversation with Stephen. Stephen, thanks so much for joining the podcast.
Delighted to be here, Barbara. Thank you for inviting me.
Listen, Stephen, as we get into the technology topic today, one of the things I've been thinking about a lot on this podcast is that we really are dealing in a moment when American manufacturing is experiencing a resurgence. I'm curious, from your perspective, do you see a resurgence happening?
Yes, I I agree with you, Barbara. For example, last year, the amount of money invested in manufacturing and construction, it was the highest it's been in decades. And according to the government, manufacturing now accounts for $2.5 trillion of the U.S. economy, which is the most ever. But Barbara, I do want to point out, that $2.5 trillion that they talk about, as large as it is, we think it understates the sector's true value. We did a study a few years back trying to capture the real impact of manufacturing, and here's what we learned. So the Bureau of Economic Analysis, great group of economists, they say manufacturing represents 11.4% of U.S. GDP. It only measures added value from the upstream supply chain through the factory floor, which means it doesn't measure the downstream sales chain, all that added value that exists after goods leave the factory. So the bottom line, when we looked at the entire picture, manufacturing's total value stream, it actually accounts for a third of the U.S. economy. So to answer your original question, this is manufacturing is vital to the U.S. economy. It's vital. It's critical to economic growth here.
Yeah. So any which way you look at it, even when you're looking at partial data, the impact is huge. And we also know that being able to make is critical to being able to innovate. Now, some of the innovations we've been seeing most recently have to do with digital transformation. A lot of people talk about a fourth industrial revolution. People get a little frustrated because we use different definitions for what's in that fourth industrial revolution. I'd love to hear, Stephen, your definition. What is that all about? And how should we be thinking about it?
I find the historical evolution of manufacturing through the first three industrial revolutions, I find it fascinating because each leap in technology, so to speak, it created an associated leap in American living standards. So you get bigger and safer food supplies, you get faster transportation, you get better medicine, more convenient lifestyles. And I think that points to the fact that our prosperity in this country has been based largely on manufacturing innovation. Let me just provide a little context for the listeners. You got a first revolution, late 1700s, mechanization, steam, moved so slowly that people really didn't even notice the change from one generation to the next. Then you get the second revolution, which is 100 years later. That had a much more noticeable impact on average Americans. You had the introduction of electricity, automobiles, airplanes, air conditioning. Third revolution, mid-20th century, electronics, computers, automation. That's when Americans were starting to become accustomed to the pace of technological change. And that's because each revolution, as I said earlier, it builds itself on the shoulders of its predecessor. So Industry 4.0 is doing exactly that right now. So with all that said, this is the way I define the fourth revolution. And it's pretty simple. It's the integration of digital and physical technologies to create this, interconnected network across a shop floor, across an enterprise, across a value chain, which we're starting to see, and all the technological advances that go into it, AI, big data, cloud computing. Those are simply tools within this broader new cyber physical world we live in.
That's a great definition. And truly, what that represents is a transformation, and it's underway. Now, Siemens and Manufacturers Alliance recently collaborated to produce a report on the state of that transformation. Would you share with our audience some of the key findings of the report and what you're taking away from our study?
What it shows is what we're trying to look at is the progress that manufacturers have made in terms of digital transformation over the past few years and where some have stalled. You and I both know manufacturers have been on this path for over a decade, for obvious reasons. After the pandemic exposed our, let's call it the kinks in the value chain, so to speak, these technological advances, we're seeing them become much more relevant to our membership and to manufacturing, writ large. So there's a lot of meat in the report, Barbara. Let me just share the high level findings. First, currently, we are seeing more digital transformation upstream, and that includes supply chain optimization, product development. In terms of production efficiencies at the factory floor, we're currently seeing more progress there than we are seeing in the downstream processes, which maybe that's normal. I know it's going to evolve. We're going to see more upstream and downstream in the coming years. Also, let me just note the study. In the study, we focused on or listed the top 3 challenges for manufacturers in terms of trying to progress in this area. So the first one was just difficulty in measuring the ROI of their digital investments. The second one, it's interestingly enough, and this came from a survey of 199 different leaders. It was a perception of an inefficient use of data and analytics. We just have to become more effective at analyzing the data that we take on. And third, the third challenge is a lack of alignment between operations functions. And the alignment issue is really so key. So many digitalization efforts right now are fragmented. This is what we're finding. And what I mean is they're one-off programs. There's a problem, let's go fix it. Which instead of creating a more integrative strategy across an enterprise, this approach isolates the technological advancement that the companies are making. And that points to the biggest area of opportunity that we see for manufacturers. And that's getting them to approach digital change from a more systematic perspective. This project, this process, it really needs to be a collaborative endeavor with internal and external partnerships. It's what we're calling ecosystems, the development of ecosystems across the enterprise, across the value chain. So instead of having these one-off solutions right now, which is what we're seeing, companies can take a more holistic approach to the digitalization across that value chain. And the companies that we find that are doing that, they really are transforming their operations a lot more quickly.
I really look forward to hearing our audience's reaction to the report. And, recognizing that you're right, we do have a lot of independent, disconnected use cases that are reported back to us. At Siemens, we introduced the term digital twin decades ago, and recently had been getting people focused on the digital thread. This idea, as you say, of looking across the ecosystem, looking holistically across business processes. But I think we are still at that stage where we're dealing with digital lint, not yet woven together into the thread, but it will come. Change will come. Now, this digitalization also does one other thing, though. It exposes some cyber risks. And I've recently published an episode with Ann Neuberger talking about the promise and peril, for instance, of AI. And so how are you seeing manufacturers cope with the cybersecurity threats to their operations once they go digital?
I think everybody knows now, cyber criminals have made, in recent years, they've made manufacturing the number one targeted industry around the world, more so than even in the financial services. And the cybersecurity experts, of course, the good guys, they're doing what they can to keep ahead of the bad guys, But talking to all the CIOs across our membership, I think there are two security paths that stand out above all others. And one is employee training, and the other is increased collaboration between the IT and the OT team. So let's take the first one, low hanging fruit. Easiest way for a bad guy to get access to a network is by an employee clicking on a link or downloading a file. Still, here we are. It's the same threat that we've seen for a decade or more. It's still the biggest threat. Happens all the time. And so this is the very first step in cybersecurity, training employees to be very suspicious. And that, of course, is true for all businesses. It's not just manufacturing. But for manufacturers, their greatest fear right now is sabotage, right? It's the shutdown of their equipment, of their machinery. All you got to do is take a look at what happened to Clorox last fall. Because of a ransomware attack, it had to shut down its operations for days, millions and millions of dollars lost. So the fact is, for all its upside, to your point, digitalization does expose our operating technologies, our OT, to the global internet. So nothing, this is what the CIOs say, nothing is more important for cybersecurity than IT and OT teams working very closely together to create a seamless, secure integration. And by the way, that does include OT experts becoming more proficient in IT and IT experts becoming more proficient in OT. So that's a very quick and dirty analysis of what we can do in terms of creating more secure
and maybe one more thing, and I'll just foot stomp something that Anne made, and a comment Anne made, that when it comes to OT password protection, we've got to get past the 123 She says it's hard to call it a cyber breach when a password is trivial. So in operational technology, where often we allow, multiple administrators to be working with that technology, passwords are treated, with less respect than perhaps they should be. So let's put in our plug to help tighten that up within the manufacturing community. Listen, what I'd love to do is touch on two more topics. This whole topic of AI, and then of course the workforce. But I'd like to start with AI. We think about these things actually going together. The fact that AI may actually help us make the workforce more productive. But if we delve into AI first specifically, what are your predictions about how AI is going to be transforming the manufacturing environment?
Yeah, well, great question. One that's obviously it's taken on a new life, with the recent spotlight on chatbots and such. But let's start with a reality check. AI has been around for a long time. Manufacturers, they've been incorporating machine learning into CAD and to CNC machines for decades, right? So it's the revolution in generative AI in the past couple of years that has created the new interest, and by the way, the new capabilities. And so while chatbots are proving useful in the manufacturing sector, and we're learning about that, it's this broader concept of AI in manufacturing. Your machine learning, your deep learning, the autonomous systems, and how Gen AI can improve those tools. That's going to be the game changer for manufacturers. And by the way, another study that we're finishing right now, and with support from Siemens, will be featured in there as well. It's looking at the current examples of AI across the manufacturing value chain. While most manufacturers are, they're still in the early stages of their journey, we are finding some really, really interesting applications. So AI is starting to help manufacturers design better and safer products, which makes sense. It's aiding in quality control and in predictive maintenance on the shop floor. Again, that makes sense. We've been dabbling in that for a while. It's helping forecast inventory needs, huge coming out of the pandemic and such. It's what it's doing is it's enabling workers to be more productive. And that kind of flies in the face of a lot of what we see in the media in terms of what's going to happen to workers. So we see the opportunities for AI that are really going to be endless for manufacturing.
Yeah, and one of the really key things is the way AI can help us interface as humans with the machines that we're working on. A good example would be the work we've done with Microsoft here at Siemens, where we've invented a copilot that will help just people interface with robotics where programming needs to be done in a specific language. Now we can use natural language. We can talk to the robots, give commands, and have those commands be translated into code. I mean, that makes it possible for someone who actually has never studied computer programming to be the one to direct the work on the automation line, really without the intervention. So I'm excited about bringing new people into the field of manufacturing. Maybe, as you say, making everybody more productive as they're working there. How do you see things changing then in the workforce? And I'd love to get your insights into where manufacturers are looking right now for the workers that they need in the future.
Well, you know, Barbara, this has been a very frustrating topic for years. It's one of manufacturing's most intractable challenges. We've been talking about this for decades, and it's not like we're doing anything wrong. It's just a huge challenge for us. And I'll say this, and it may be controversial, but the problem did start when our school systems in this country stopped emphasizing science and math skills decades ago, and they jettisoned vocational education. So instead of recognizing, like Germany did, that a proportion of the student population would be better served in technical schools instead of four-year liberal arts schools, we stigmatized voc ed. We preached everyone should go to a university, and well, we now know better, don't we? So what we need to do is this is quick assessment. We really do need to emphasize there's got to be more emphasis on STEM education for younger students. Got to bring it back into the schools. We're never going to adopt the German dual ed system. Too bad. But we can improvise. You look at manufacturers across the country, they're partnering with these technical colleges and with high schools and junior colleges. And what we're doing is we're slowly but steadily seeing this increase in this kind of public-private partnership where manufacturers are working with schools and with the students, with kids, to create apprenticeships to help train the next generation of workers. And that's how we're going to better develop the skilled talent we need in this country for the future. And let's face it, it's becoming a more serious challenge as technology advances. It's going to continue becoming a more serious challenge. We need more and more people who have those kinds of skills to work with that very sophisticated factory floor and supply chain systems and such that we have right now.
Yeah, I like to think about this as the German apprenticeship model, but with American spirit. We have that tremendous network of community colleges. We have manufacturers in local communities all across the nation beginning to work on new programs that way. And I'll make one more prediction, that it's not going to be just kids coming out of high school, but it's actually going to be people at many stages of their careers realizing that, hey, they could actually make a step into the world of manufacturing and might find it very rewarding. So bringing folks off the sidelines right now is one of those big focus areas for me. So, Stephen, with all of these changes going on, does it take a different kind of leader in manufacturing today?
So generations are changing in manufacturing. Obviously, it's a much different world than we had 20, 30, 40 years ago, and it's changing more rapidly. With the technological change, with the change in generations, the demographic changes. And what we're finding is that leaders have to, bottom line, you have to have leaders who are more empathic, leaders who listen more, because the generations that are coming up through the ranks, they know a lot, right? They have a lot to offer in terms of the technological change that's occurring. They also have a lot to offer in terms of how consumer behaviors and preferences are changing. So what we're finding is that the leader, especially the CEO, but the leader of the past, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years ago, that leader would probably not have the same success as the new leaders today, because the new leaders today, what they're doing is they are embracing change. They understand change is inevitable, and they're listening, especially to the people around them, not just to the boards, but they're listening to the people who are direct reports to them. They're listening to people on the factory floor. They're more willing to gain information from everybody around them.
We used to think of this as, one generation handing the torch to the next. Now what we're doing is building multi-generational teams. It's not a generational thing. We actually have 5 generations working in our
Yeah,
manufacturing
right.
operations now. And so as we look around, we're looking for those empowering and empathetic and leaders who will listen. Is that's going to be the superpower. And it turns out they might be part of any one of the active generations in our workplace right now.
Sure. And I'll just say, I always found this fascinating. Neil Howe, the demographer who actually coined the term millennials back in the 90s, I remember hearing him talk, and he said he was speaking to our board, and he said, every generation throughout history has the older generations teach the younger generations. This is the first generation in history where it's reversed, where younger generations are teaching older generations. It's just an enormous, mind-boggling change in culture and in how generations interact.
So, Stephen, is this a time when someone who actually didn't grow up in manufacturing could step into a leadership role and be effective?
Yeah, well, first of all, considering how technology is, the similar technologies are getting spread across society, we are actually seeing more and more people who are not originally trained in manufacturing. The traditional engineers and such, who moving up through the ranks. We're seeing more and more non-engineers, people coming from outside of the sector, taking over leadership roles, and that's because manufacturing, as complex as it is, and I always say it's got more challenges and than any other sector out there. At the same time, leadership is leadership. What we're seeing is people who understand how to run, become leaders with the younger generations in one sector. It's transferring, that skill set is transferring very easily to the next, because ultimately it's about creating a certain collegiality, a certain trust, and in the younger generations, in the older generations, and vice versa. So we are actually seeing leaders coming out of other sectors and being successful in the manufacturing sector.
Stephen, this has been a fantastic conversation. I love to end every episode hearing my guests talk about their vision for the future. I'd love to know if Manufacturers Alliance is successful in supporting manufacturers in this transformation, if we're able to use these modern technologies. Tell us about the future we can create together.
It is so clear to me. Industry 4.0 is propelling U.S. manufacturing into the future, and that in turn, it's going to have a tremendous impact on the lives of humans, everywhere, not just in this country, but everywhere. I said it earlier, no sector has done more to increase living standards in this country and frankly around the world than manufacturing. And yet we have never experienced the degree of change that American manufacturing especially is about to undergo. So I guess, my parting words to you would be, I love to quote Frank Sinatra, the best is yet to come. I think we have a very bright future for American manufacturing, and that in turn is going to have a tremendous impact on Americans everywhere.
Well, Stephen Gold, it's a pleasure to have you on the Optimistic Outlook podcast, and I look forward to shaping that future with you.
Thank you very much. Love being on the show, and I appreciate helping talk about manufacturing, spreading the word about manufacturing to everybody else.
Hey, Stephen and I covered a lot of ground in that conversation. A point I didn't make in my intro is that, yes, the fourth industrial revolution is now starting to accelerate. But the concept itself actually emerged more than a decade ago. So why are things starting to move faster? Well, think about your own personal digital transformation journey you've been on over the past decade and ask yourself, was it the phone that made it possible, or was it the apps? It was the rise of platform models that made it possible for software to, quote, eat the world, as that famous line goes. And now in American manufacturing, we're giving leaders those platform models, those apps, if you will, that remove layers of complexity. We're bringing interfaces that were much more intuitive, the way your phone is, or that feel more like playing a video game. And now we also have generative AI and the ability to manage data like never before. Projects held back by too much complexity are going to start speeding forward because the tools we're looking for have officially arrived. They're here, ready for us to use. And I'm looking forward to now experiencing and exploring this more with you in future episodes. See you next time.
Please follow us on social media and on your favorite podcasting platform. Thank you for tuning in.